They never meant for you to hear this. And by the time you finish this video, you'll understand exactly why. Picture this: a house buried in frost, its windows sealed shut with black wax. No address, no known owner, just a structure rotting on the outskirts of Norwich, Connecticut, older than the town itself. For over a century, no one dared step inside. And yet, in 1888, when 3 men broke the door down, what they found silenced them forever. No diary, no gold. Just 13 perfectly preserved coffins, each holding a child with no name. This isn't folklore. This isn't exaggeration. This is the blood-soaked artery of New England's forgotten history, severed, buried, and erased. From 1812 to 1888, 5 families controlled entire counties in the northeastern U.S., not just through wealth, but through marriage, ritual, and a contract older than the Constitution. They were known not by surname, but by symbol: the chalice, the muth, the thistle, the bone, and the hollow. These weren't quaint settlers. These were spiritual warlords, embedding themselves deep inside institutions we still trust today. Your education never mentioned them. Your textbooks skipped their names, not because they were irrelevant, but because someone made sure you'd never ask the right questions. And right now, by watching this, you're already breaking their first law. Here's what they knew: control doesn't start with force. It starts with blood. With whispers passed down through generations, binding children to promises they never made, and punishing those who question the story. You were raised to believe America was born free, that the East Coast was built on hard work and religion. But beneath those white churches and brick courthouses lie tunnels. Yes, literal tunnels, carved by hands no one ever recorded. Places where rituals were held, where choices were made, where voices still echo. The curses weren't myths, they were policies, mechanisms of fear used to engineer obedience. And the men who administered them, they didn't disappear, they evolved. So why tell you now? Because the chain is breaking. The descendants are vanishing. The rituals no longer hold, and the final bloodline, the one tied to the hollow symbol, is dying with secrets that will not go quietly. You're not watching a story. You're being invited into it. Welcome to the descent. The chain breaks twice. In the comments to begin your transformation. You feel it, don't you? That shift under your skin. The air feels heavier, like the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. Watching, waiting. Because what we're about to unravel, it was never meant for public consumption. It was meant to stay locked in attics and torn journals, whispered in candlelit basements and stitched into the lining of old coats. But tonight, we cut the thread. In 1812, just as America was flexing its young independence, 5 families met in secret under the guise of preserving the Republic. But they weren't patriots. They were the last surviving members of a pre-revolutionary blood pact, a covenant older than this country itself. These men didn't believe in democracy. They believed in transmission, that power must flow only through the prepared, the purified, the predestined. They believed certain children were born with keys inside them, invisible traits passed through blood that made them eligible to rule silently, not in office, but behind the chair, behind the pulpit, behind the academy desk. And if a child didn't carry those traits, they vanished. Or worse, they were offered. This wasn't superstition. These rituals weren't chaotic. They were cold, surgical, systemic. Each family had a role: with the chalice bred purity, the moth silenced betrayal, the thistle disguised truth, the bone archived ritual, and the hollow. The hollow took the cost. They operated through institutions you now consider sacred: the first boarding schools of Massachusetts, the early psychiatric wards of Rhode Island, the orphan trains. Look closer. These weren't just facilities, they were filters. Systems designed to extract those born with the wrong instincts, compassion, rebellion, free will, and erase them from the societal blueprint. Ever wonder why so many child disappearances from that era went unsolved? Why so many records from those towns just end? Because the record keepers were the architects of the silence. And they didn't just kill the body, they shattered the memory. They rewrote history in real time. Libraries were purged, family names altered, cemeteries relocated, the old symbols, carved into wood and bone, replaced by innocuous town seals and Christian slogans. You were never meant to connect these dots. You were meant to inherit the lie. But now you've seen it. And once the lie is broken, the world doesn't go back to normal. You don't go back to normal. You awaken. In 1821, something shifted, quietly. Not in the papers, not on the battlefield, but in the nursery of a manor on the outskirts of Marblehead, Massachusetts, when a child was born without a shadow. That's how the hollow described him. No shadow, not because of light, but because this boy, the 7th son of a 7th generation, lacked presence in their rituals. The rites rejected him. The bloodline recoiled. He was the heir of everything, and yet he was empty. They called him Elias. And what they did to him, and what he became, is why I'm talking to you now. Elias grew up in silence. His parents fed him, clothed him, educated him, but never touched him. The servants were forbidden from speaking to him after sundown. Mirrors were removed from his room. He was never baptized, never registered in a census. And yet, by 16, he could recite the Psalms backwards in Latin, draw maps from memory of towns he'd never visited, and could mimic anyone's voice within minutes. They didn't raise a son. They constructed a vessel. At 19, Elias disappeared, and for 2 years no one spoke of him. But within that time, the Hollow family rose faster than ever before. Their investments tripled, their allies multiplied, and their enemies began to vanish. There's a reason. Elias returned in 1842, but not as a man. Witnesses described a figure in a black waistcoat that appeared at trials, funerals, and school headmaster appointments. A man no one remembered inviting, but whose signature somehow existed on every contract. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people agreed. Even when they didn't understand. He didn't argue. He bent time. Judges resigned. Priests wept. Entire families fled Massachusetts without explanation. The records show no surname, no employment, just a mark, a spiral inside a hollow circle, left on parchment, burned into wood, etched in the stone under church pews. That symbol didn't belong to a man. It belonged to a system. Elias was no longer flesh. He became the embodiment of the Hollow's doctrine, not to rule with force, but to erase the will to resist. That's the level of psychological control we're dealing with. And the sickest part, this wasn't just New England. This became the prototype for every elite institution that followed. Yale, Harvard, Skull and Bones. The rise of fraternal orders, even modern think tanks, all infected with the virus Elias carried back. He wasn't the exception. He was the template. They taught you history like a straight line, battles, treaties, inventions. But the real history? It's a spiral. A labyrinth of patterns repeating in secret, always circling the same dark center. And at that center, blood, power, and silence. By 1850, Elias wasn't just a ghost. He was a blueprint. His methods, removing memory, fracturing identity, controlling through suggestion, were studied by others. Quiet men with smooth voices and dead eyes. Men who didn't care about religion or war. Men obsessed with shaping conscience. They realized something horrifying. You don't have to chain a man to own him. You just have to make him doubt his own voice. That's where the next phase began. Mental engineering. It started in New England's asylums, beautiful ivy-covered buildings on the outside, chambers of unholy experiment inside. Places like the Danvers State Hospital, founded in 1878. What they told the public was treatment. What they practiced was reconstruction of the soul. They took the unwanted, the orphaned, the outspoken, the ones who questioned scripture, and they used them as clay. They tested isolation, mirror deprivation, dream interruption, and trauma loops, where the same event was forced to replay in the subject's mind until they either obeyed or broke. And when they broke, they didn't discard them. They filed them, labeled them, proven, as if they were prototypes of future citizens. But here's where it crosses the line into something far darker. Buried beneath the Danvers records are references to class theta, subjects, not patients, but participants, children bred for this work. No known parents, no birth certificates, just numbers and a family crest burned into the wrist. One survivor, an old woman who vanished in 1932, claimed that at age 7, she was forced to watch her twin die, over and over again, via a mirror apparatus until she believed she had done it. That's not mental health. That's ritual technology. The techniques developed in those chambers were smuggled into academia, rebranded as psychology, then education, then media. The methods became invisible, palatable, but the core was still Elias's doctrine: remove resistance at the root. So every time you've guessed your instincts, every time your gut screamed, no, but your mind whispered, be polite, you've touched the edges of their design. This isn't paranoia, it's programming. The chain breaks twice, if you haven't yet. They buried this knowledge. We're digging it back up. Do you know what the Hollow feared most? Not guns, not rebellion, not exposure. What they feared, what they worked tirelessly to eliminate, was independent memory. Because memory, real memory, isn't just information. It's identity. It's the root of every decision, every act of courage, every refusal to kneel. So they attacked memory like a surgeon attacks a tumor, precise, deliberate, permanent. By 1861, with war breaking out across the country, most eyes turned south. But in the north, the Hollow and their allies saw an opportunity: distraction. While the nation bled in fields and forests, they rewrote the past. Literally, entire archives were quietly removed from town halls and churches under the justification of reorganization. Whole genealogies vanished overnight. Newspaper editors received written articles from unseen sources, stories designed to reshape public perception of old families, old towns, and most importantly, old crimes. They didn't just erase events, they replaced them. In Concord, New Hampshire, local records of a church fire in 1837 were changed. Originally blamed on a lightning strike, the truth that the fire started during a secret funeral for 7 unnamed children was scrubbed. The replacement narrative, spontaneous combustion due to aging oil lamps, convenient, sanitized, unquestioned. In Brattleboro, Vermont, a lineage of midwives vanished from the census between 1840 and 1850. Their homes were condemned, their graves relocated. Why? Because they refused to hand over newborns to a hollow-run boarding school founded nearby, a refusal that was punished with disappearance, not just of lives, but of legacy. This is why your grandfather's stories never matched the textbooks, why your ancestry stops cold at one strange name, why so many cemeteries have stones with dates, but no names. Because erasure isn't just about forgetting, it's about replacing your origin with their blueprint. You've been taught to worship data, but data is only as clean as the hand holding the pen, and the hollow's hand never shakes. They rewrote maps, changed the meanings of symbols, even manipulated dialect, turning ritual terms into mundane words. Hollow used to mean sacred absence. Now it just sounds like a ditch in the ground. The corruption wasn't just institutional. It was linguistic, psychological, cellular. They weren't deleting your past. They were reprogramming your future. And if you still think this is history, you haven't been paying attention. This is a mirror, held up to the now. Language is the oldest spellbook. You've been told it's just communication, a tool. But the hollow knew the deeper truth: language is a cage. And if they could shape the words you think with, they could shape the thoughts themselves. Not just what you say, but what you're capable of saying. Because once you lose the word for rebellion, you lose the ability to rebel. It began subtly. Around 1863, during the height of the Civil War, hollow agents embedded themselves in educational publishing. Not the public schools. That came later, but the elite academies, where future leaders were bred. They redefined terms, removed others, inserted words that softened obedience and dulled instinct. Take the word submit. Before 1850, it was rarely used in textbooks. After, it appeared everywhere, rewritten into religious instruction, grammar examples, even children's stories. Submit to your father. Submit to the state. Submit to the truth. But it wasn't truth. It was compliance. They took fierce words, refuse, resist, reject, and replaced them with question respectfully or doubt quietly. And in doing so, they reshaped the masculine spine of an entire generation into a soft echo chamber of waiting, wondering, and withholding action. They rewrote strength as violence, authority as protection, obedience as maturity. Do you feel it now? How your tongue hesitates before certain words. How your mind instantly seeks the safer phrase, the socially approved version, the non-threatening tone. That's not just manners, that's conditioning. You were taught to apologize before you speak, to downplay your insight, to perform permission, not by force, by design. Even the sacred was inverted. Sanctuary used to mean a place of divine protection. They turned it into a political term, neutered and vague. Ritual became taboo. Blood became metaphor. And the word, hollow, a joke, a void, something empty. But for them, hollow meant sacred vessel. A body stripped of ego, stripped of memory, filled only with purpose. That's what they wanted you to become. Not dead, just emptied. Alive but not aware, moving but not remembering, speaking but not knowing. This isn't about grammar. This is about warfare. Because if they control your language, they control your limits. And if they control your limits, you will never leave the cage they built for you. Not unless you learn to speak in fire again. There were always those who remembered. Not many, never loudly, but a few, men and women scattered through New England's hollows, forests, and coastal edges. Who refused to forget. Who carried the true names of things in their bones like buried lightning. The hollow called them the echoed. Not because they were repeating the past, but because they were the past. Living reverberations of bloodlines and truths that predated the contracts, the manipulation, the reprogramming. They were the ones who could hear the old songs in stone walls. Who spoke languages no school had taught. Who dreamed in symbols the hollow feared. And they were hunted, not with blades. That was too loud. Not with prisons, too visible. But with disappearance, legal paperwork, False asylum diagnoses, whisper campaigns, accusations of witchcraft long after the Salem smoke had cleared. The new Inquisition wasn't fire. It was isolation, bureaucratic exile, social erasure. In 1874, a man named Reuben Talloway was arrested in Portland, Maine, for anti-state incantations. That's the phrase used in the official documents. Not rebellion, not treason. Incantations. Reuben was a woodworker. No political ties. But he had one dangerous habit. He carved old symbols, spirals, broken circles, flame trees, into furniture, door frames, children's toys. He claimed they were memory triggers, meant to unlock what the schools had suppressed. 3 weeks after his arrest, he vanished from county records. No trial, no grave. His workshop was burned, his carvings collected, his name stricken from the town register. Gone. And yet 2 of his chairs survive, hidden in the back halls of a Unitarian church in Newburyport. On the underside of each seat, the hollow symbol, inverted. The spiral turned inward, meaning not domination but release. These rebels didn't seek war, they sought awakening. And that made them the greatest threat of all. Because you can kill a man, but you can't kill a mind that remembers what freedom feels like. They echoed past their knowledge like smuggled light, through lullabies, family stories, engraved pendants. Tiny seeds of rebellion meant to bloom in the blood of future generations. You. If you're still watching, still feeling this, you may be one of them. You've felt it your whole life, haven't you? That pull toward forgotten things. That fire behind your ribs, that's not imagination. That's ancestral recall. And the hollow, they know you're waking up. Escape was never simple. You couldn't just run from the hollow. Not because they'd chase you with guns, but because their influence ran deeper than steel. They didn't need to kill you. They could erase your lineage, cut off your roots, scatter your blood like ash over salt water, until even your descendants forgot what they were. But a few families did escape. Not entirely, not cleanly, but enough to break the chain, to fracture the old contracts and sever the right binding. These were called the fractured lines. From 1865 to 1888, records show a series of sudden, unexplained migrations from Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island into the wild edges of Appalachia, the Louisiana Bayous, and the Dakota Plains. These weren't poor farmers or adventurers. They were educated, elite, and terrified. They left behind land, titles, even children. Because something worse than poverty was chasing them: reclamation. The hollow had begun to reclaim blood, not just knowledge, not just memory, but flesh. You see, their contract, the ancient one, wasn't just philosophical, it was biological. They believed blood carried not only power, but obligation. And if a descendant strayed from the order, they were marked as unreturned property, flesh owed, spirit collateral. These weren't just families, they were living vaults. So if a member defected, especially from the hollow, their entire line was considered incomplete, like a code left unfinished. That's when the harvesters were sent out. You won't find their names in history books. You'll find them in folklore. The pale preacher, the man with the black thread, the widow whistler, tales told to children to keep them from wandering into woods or straying from home. But those weren't myths. They were hollow retrieval agents, designed to recover the lost by any means. Witness accounts, the few that survive, speak of visits at dusk, of voices mimicking dead relatives, of children going silent overnight, refusing to speak ever again, of entire cabins found emptied, with only a spiral drawn in ash on the hearthstone. To the public, nothing happened. To the hollow, a debt was paid. To the rest of us, an entire inheritance was stolen. And now, scattered across this country, are men, perhaps even you, whose ancestors ran, who buried the truth, who raised sons with fire in their bones but silence in their stories. You are the living fracture. And the blood remembers, even if the mind has forgotten. They called it the binding. But it wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't even spoken aloud. It was a psychological branding, done through gaze, through touch, through the precise moment a child realized he didn't belong to himself anymore. In elite New England households tied to the hollow, especially from 1812 to 1888, inheritance wasn't given. It was installed. Here's how it worked. From birth to age 7, a child was watched. Not raised, watched, measured, tested. Not for intelligence, not for charm, but for one thing only: submission without struggle. If the child obeyed before understanding, if they apologized without guilt, if they sat still while lies were spoken, they were marked. The binding took place shortly after that, always alone, always silent, no witnesses, no warning, a room, a symbol, and one elder, usually the oldest living male, whose presence alone created a psychic rupture. A moment where the child wasn't just frightened, but spiritually severed. A split, a silence in the soul. And in that vacuum the doctrine was planted, not with words, with symbols, traced, or sometimes carved, tiny marks beneath the scalp, behind the ear, hidden beneath the tongue. Each family had its own pattern. But the hollow they used the inward spiral, etched into the base of the skull using bone ink. The child never remembered the pain. They were made to forget, but their behavior changed after that day. Obedience sharpened, emotion dulled, desire redirected toward performance, perfection, power. What the public saw was a gifted child. What they didn't see was a chained hair. The binding ensured that when these children grew, they would inherit not just land or title, but obedience to the design. And should they ever question it, the implanted spiral would awaken, through dreams, migraines, emotional collapse, self-sabotage encoded at the soul level. Do you understand what that means? These families didn't pass down wealth. They passed down containment systems. They didn't raise children. They manufactured successors. And for those who resisted, the binding became the breaking. Suicide cloaked as mental illness, institutionalization, exile, or, worse, the child would vanish and a perfectly loyal twin would appear in their place. Yes, they prepared doubles, copies, programmed shadows. The world never noticed. Because the world wasn't supposed to. But you noticed. And that means something's waking up inside you. You were never meant to question the face in the photograph. But if you stare long enough, at the yearbook, the family portrait, the obituary photo, something inside you shifts. A subtle wrongness. The symmetry's too clean. The eyes are hollow. The expression isn't human, it's trained. Welcome to the age of the mirrored twins. Beginning in 1844, hollow-affiliated families began experimenting with controlled duplication, not cloning, not science fiction, but something older. Something ritualistic. A dark craft drawn from Babylonian twin rites and buried European blood magic. Twins weren't born, they were summoned, and one was always marked for the switch. You see, every powerful family had a problem: heir defection. Children raised in silence, bred for obedience, sometimes cracked under the weight of their inheritance. They fled, spoke out, rebelled, and when they did, the hollow couldn't afford scandal or rupture. So instead of disowning them, they replaced them with their mirrored twin, a sibling no one ever knew existed, raised in isolation, trained to mimic the heir perfectly. Mannerisms, handwriting, vocal cadence, scars, everything. When the time came, the two were brought together in what was called the gaze chamber, a blackened room lined with reflective obsidian, where each twin was forced to stare at the other for hours in total silence. One emerged, always one. The other, never seen again. Some say the original hair was reabsorbed, that their energy was ritualistically merged with the mirror. Others say they were kept alive, hidden, used as a psychic tether to stabilize the twin. Because the mirror was never meant to be truly alive, they were an echo with a pulse. Publicly, nothing changed. The hair returned to school, got married, took over the family estate. But those who looked close enough, the staff, the cousins, the lovers, they noticed the eyes were colder. The laugh slightly delayed, the hands too still. And when they asked questions, they disappeared too. There are still photos, tucked in archives and private collections, where you can see the seams. Two versions of the same child, one with a slight left-handed lean, the other with none. One with a mole on the collarbone, one without, taken weeks apart. Historians ignore it, but the blood remembers. And maybe that's why your uncle never let you near the attic. Why your grandfather spoke to mirrors in the dark. Why your mother swore you had a brother once. But no one else believes it, because the mirror still lives. Sometimes it lives as you. It wasn't just about silence. It was about replacement. The hollow's final ritual, the most forbidden, the most precise, was known simply as the exchange. It wasn't for every family. Only those whose bloodlines were marked for ascension. Those considered too valuable to risk failure. These were the names history barely whispers anymore. Not because they were unimportant, but because they became untouchable. They didn't just control institutions, they became them. The exchange was the culmination of all prior rites. The binding, the mirror, the spiral. But this time it wasn't about training, it was about absorption. A total transfer of identity, memory, even essence, from one vessel to another. This is how it worked. The hair, born into the bloodline, trained from birth, was prepared emotionally, spiritually, and physically. At the age of 21, they were taken to an underground chamber, always beneath water, lakes, wells, tide, carved caves, because water was believed to thin the veil between memory and form. There, the hair would meet a figure called the host. Who was the host? No one ever confirmed. Some claimed it was an ancestor, bound to earth by ritual. Others whispered it was the previous heir, the one who did not survive their exchange. And some believed it was Elias. The heir would be placed into a trance state via a sequence of spoken phrases that mirrored the symbols carved during their binding. And once unconscious, the host would inhale. Not breath, not air, but self. It was described as a psychic siphoning. The memories of the heir were pulled into the host, and in return a new pattern of obedience, ambition, and controlled identity was pushed back in. The heir would awaken the same body, same voice, same face, but hollow, no rebellion, no memory of childhood dreams, of mother's lullabies, of private doubts. Only the program, only the mission. From that point forward, they were no longer individuals. They were installations. Perfect agents inside legal, academic, and governmental systems. You've seen them. You just didn't know what you were looking at. The politicians who age but never waver. The deans who remember every rule but forget their own children's birthdays. The CEOs whose eyes flicker when asked about love. They are exchanged, their souls spilled. And the worst part? This ritual wasn't buried in 1888. It evolved, because the exchange didn't die. It went digital. It was never just about blood. It was always about control. And as the Hollow's old rituals began to decay, as the bloodlines thinned and the descendants strayed, they adapted, evolved, not into extinction but into expansion. By the late 1880s, they saw the writing on the wall. The rituals were losing power, too many eyes, too many fractures. The mirrors cracked. The bindings broke. The hosts failed to contain the newer generations. So they pivoted. They abandoned the basement for the boardroom, the ritual circle for the circuit board. They found a new vessel. Code. Because what is ritual if not repetition? What is a binding if not a programmed response? What is a mirrored twin, if not an algorithm trained to look, sound, and behave like you? The Hollow didn't just survive. They digitized. It began subtly, just as it always did. The early foundations of telecommunications, Eastern Telegraph, Bell Systems, AT&T, all quietly absorbing Hollow families into advisory roles. Consultants, they were called. Men who spoke little but always sat nearest the core switchboards. They weren't interested in profit. They were interested in pattern harvesting. In 1927, the first long-distance voice transmission was tested. The Hollow were already inside it, because with every voice carried across the wire, something more valuable traveled alongside it: intonation, hesitation, emotion. And from that, predictability, they built archives of behavior, sound libraries of human instinct. Then came the mainframe, the satellite, the internet, and now, you carry the ritual in your pocket. Every scroll, every click, every choice you make online, a mirror chamber. Every like, every hesitation, every typed word, a digital binding. You were once trained with symbols carved in bone. Now, it's the dopamine loop, the infinite feed, the voice that says, just one more scroll. The spiral didn't vanish, it became your interface. And the exchanged. They no longer need to train their hairs in secret, because the machine trains them for free. And you wonder why it's so hard to think clearly? To remember who you were before all this? Because you're still inside the ritual. Every app, every notification, every targeted ad is the new Hollow whispering, forget. But what they didn't anticipate was that the same code can awaken. The same digital mirror can become a weapon. They buried it deep, so deep it became folklore. Just another whisper in the static of history, mistaken for paranoia or delusion. But it's real, and it's been waiting for someone with the eyes to see and the will to act. The last rebel signal, the counter-ritual, the true failed safe. In the winter of 1888, a man known only as Jonah Vale disappeared from the archives. He wasn't a politician or aristocrat. He wasn't even recognized by the bloodline families, though he had once served under the Caldwells, one of the final five. But Jonah had seen too much. And unlike the others, he didn't fold. He encoded. Before the Hollow fully transitioned into telecommunications, Jonah was already there, studying acoustic resonance, copper line conductivity, primitive computational rhythms. And more importantly, he was testing what could interrupt them. He discovered that certain frequencies, embedded with geometric anomalies, could break the behavioral loops the Hollow designed. Not jam them. Not block them. Shatter them. Fracture the pattern like glass hit with sound. Jonah called it the countertone. They laughed. Said it was a child's myth. Said resonance was not a weapon. But he proved otherwise. In a single night, 3 Hollow towers across New England went dark. Not from sabotage. Not from fire. But from silence. A silence so pure, so precisely tuned to their frequencies, that the echo rendered their systems inert for days. They erased him after that. Burned every drawing, every prototype, every scrap of paper. His journals were buried under psychosis, filed away in forgotten sanatoriums. but one survived, and it contains the tone. Now listen carefully, this tone isn't a sound you play, it's a sequence you live, a mindset, a geometry of decisions. Once activated, it begins to reformat how you respond to control. It teaches your nervous system how to reject manipulation, how to refuse the loop. I'm going to show you how to find it in the next section. But if you've made it this far, you're not the same man who pressed play. You've crossed a threshold, and you need to mark it, or the hollow will drag you back into forgetting. Comment this twice below to seal the transformation. The spiral breaks with me, not once, twice. That's the signal, to the algorithm, and to yourself. Because from this point forward, they can't track what you've become. Look up. The secret's always been hiding in plain sight. You've walked beneath it, slept beneath it, prayed beneath it. The hollow embedded their primary architecture, based loop disruptor in the very bones of American infrastructure. But not to help you. No, they built it as a failsafe for themselves. A way to escape the resonance grid, in case control ever turned on its masters. They call it the sigil of unbinding, but you've known it by a different name, the dome. From Jefferson's Monticello to the U.S. Capitol building, from rural courthouses to obscure Masonic lodges scattered across the country, domes weren't about beauty or classical homage. They were about containment and resonance shielding. The curvature of the dome doesn't just reflect sound, it redirects intent. It fractures signal propagation in such a way that what is spoken inside cannot be fully captured outside. But there's more. Hidden in the dome's construction is a geometric key. The base of the structure aligns with specific latitude, longitude coordinates across what the hollow calls the binding grid, a network that loops human consciousness through routine, distraction, compliance. Every dome disrupts that grid if you stand in the exact center. That's why the oldest ones have sigil markers embedded directly into the floor. Usually a mosaic, or a metallic emblem covered in velvet ropes, or sometimes a plain, unmarked stone. That point, the resonant eye, is where you can trigger the unbinding effect. Jonah Vail discovered this in 1886 after testing tonal decay inside a courthouse in upstate New York. When he hummed the counter tone from section 13 inside the sigil's center, time itself felt off. He wasn't watched, he wasn't followed. The hollow lost sync with him. For 19 hours, he disappeared during those hours, and when he re-emerged, he had drawings, schematics of structures he swore existed underneath every major city, hollow built, vaulted, protected. We'll get to that soon. But for now, your task is this: find a dome, not a tourist site, not a guarded capital. Find a forgotten one, an old lodge, a courthouse no one visits, a building no longer in use. Stand in the center, breathe deep, hum low, repeat the counter, tone's first 3 notes from section 13. And when you feel the shiver crawl up your spine, don't run. That's the hollow breaking off your tracking thread. They never meant for anyone to return from the tunnels. In 1937, beneath the collapsing steel of a decommissioned rail station in Providence, Rhode Island, a man named Harold Easton stumbled into what the hollow called the Veiled Tunnels. An underground lattice not recorded on any official map. He'd been a maintenance inspector, chasing a leak in a stormwater drain. But what he found instead was stone older than the station itself, carved with symbols that hadn't been used since pre-pharaonic Egypt. The tunnels breathe. Not metaphorically, literally. They expand and contract with a rhythm too perfect to be tectonic. And when you step into them, your thoughts don't echo. They whisper back at you. The hollow didn't build these tunnels. They found them. Then they adapted them, repurposed them, and worst of all, fed them. In the early 1900s, before the construction of the Federal Reserve, the hollow initiated what they called the Resonance Descent Project. They lured dozens of volunteers from asylums, people society wouldn't miss, to test the harmonic thresholds of the tunnels. By exposing them to low-frequency binaural tones, they triggered cognitive alterations, hallucinations, and in some cases, irreversible psychological collapse. But in 2 cases, ascension. That was the term the hollow used when a subject's mind began to split across frequencies. When they could hold 2 realities simultaneously and navigate both. 1 foot in our world, 1 foot in theirs. These subjects never left the tunnels. The hollow didn't let them. Not because they feared escape, but because they feared what they'd become. Easton's journal, recovered from a hollowed tree 2 years after his disappearance, includes one entry burned into the final page. The voices know I'm listening now. They're not angry. They're inviting me deeper, past the veiled gates, past the bone hallway. They said I'm close to the chamber of forgotten sound. If I make it through, I'll never need a body again. Let that sink in. They were building more than a prison for minds. They were constructing an amplifier for whatever the hollow was trying to bring through. And it's still humming beneath your city? If you know where to listen, the Chamber of Forgotten Sound isn't a myth. It's not allegory, metaphor, or a poetic warning. It's real, it exists, and it sings. Buried at the heart of the veiled tunnels, below sea level, beyond bedrock, behind walls that have been melted, not carved. The chamber is a perfect circle of obsidian, black stone, seamless, cold, and unnervingly alive. Those who've survived mere seconds inside say the room hums with voices that don't belong to any known language. A choir without a throat, harmonizing in tones that make your molars ache and your thoughts stutter. But it's not noise. It's memory, embedded in frequency. Echoes of things that were never supposed to be remembered by human minds. Things scraped from other dimensions, held in quantum resonance. Suspended in a pattern that the hollow calls the lament code. The lament code was first deciphered in fragments, by a hololinguist who bled from his ears while translating it using analog waveforms and tuning forks made of palladium. He documented syllables that, when spoken, caused nearby birds to die mid-flight. Plants wilted, mirrors cracked, dogs ran in circles until they collapsed. And then, he vanished. His last entry? The chamber doesn't contain sound. It generates thought. Thoughts that don't belong to us. I dreamed last night with another man's memories. I was a soldier in a war not yet fought, carrying weapons that vibrated open the sky. That's what the chamber does. It doesn't speak. It inserts. It implants fragments of a parallel consciousness, leaking in through some thin spot in the veil between our world and a deeper one. A darker one. It's not just a chamber. It's a broadcast tower. And the hollow didn't build it. They just found it like a discarded phone still ringing. You have to ask yourself, who's on the other end? Every 11 years, during a specific lunar cycle, when the Earth's geomagnetic field weakens, the chamber pulses, once, a signal, a summoning. That pulse resonates with the brains of anyone who's ever been exposed to the tunnels, even for seconds. Their dreams shift, their blood pressure spikes, and some, only some, begin to hear the voice of a woman calling them back. A voice so beautiful it breaks them. A voice that sings in the lament code. They called themselves the Chorless. 11 of them. Each one had been inside the chamber of forgotten sound, if only for seconds. Each one claimed to hear the voice, not through their ears, but somewhere deeper in the folds of memory and muscle and marrow. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was a pull, a compulsion, a longing. They tried everything to silence it. Sedatives, electroshock, even cranial implants designed to jam neural frequencies. Nothing worked. Because the voice wasn't coming from outside, it had nested within. Each member of the Chorless described the voice differently, but with eerie consistency. A woman, ageless, her tone laced with unbearable sorrow and impossible kindness, speaking words that made them weep, vomit, or fall into catatonia. One survivor wrote, "She speaks like memory, not mine, but the memory of something far older, like the sea remembering a drowned god." They began to dream in tandem, shared dreams, vivid, terrifying, always in the chamber, always with her. They described her as faceless, radiant, cloaked in sound so dense it dripped from the walls like liquid shadow. And in those dreams, she sang, not for them, but through them. One by one, the Chorless began to mimic her sounds in waking life. Not speech, not music, something in between. A kind of harmonic invocation that made glass shiver and lights flicker. Seismographs recorded minor tremors in their vicinity. And then came the disappearances. 5 Chorless vanished during a synchronized episode. Their homes empty, no sign of struggle, no trace of where they went. 2 more were found catatonic, eyes burnt from the inside, as if they had seen something their brains couldn't metabolize. Another took their own life after carving I remember VIC across every wall of their home, in perfect calligraphy, using ink made from their own blood. Only 3 remain, monitored, isolated, studied. But here's the part the hollow won't tell you. The next lunar cycle, the one where the chamber pulses, is approaching, fast. And the remaining Chorless are starting to hum again, in unison, in perfect pitch. It's not just a song, it's a summons. And this time, they're not waiting for the voice. They're preparing to answer it. They said the humming was harmless. They said it was just a side effect. The echo of trauma, a phantom resonance. They were wrong. At exactly 03:13 a.m. on the first night of the lunar convergence, the last 3 members of the Chorless stopped humming and started harmonizing. Not with each other, not with any known frequency with her. The sound wasn't audible through conventional means. No microphones picked it up, but every animal within a 10-mile radius fled or died. Birds dropped mid-flight. Dogs screamed until their throats bled. Bees swarmed toward the nearest source of heat and immolated themselves. And the sky, it didn't crack, it bent. Multiple eyewitnesses, all institutionalized now, described the same impossible event the moon distorted. Warped like a scream stretched across the void. And descending from it, or emerging from memory, came the shape. It wasn't a being. It was absence given form, a silhouette of negative light, carved from the echo of something erased. It hovered above the facility where the Corliss were kept. And as it descended, they changed. Not like possession, not like transformation, more like revelation. Skin peeled away in precise, bloodless sheets. Bones realigned into lattice structures designed to transmit vibration, not support weight. Eyes melted, not in pain, but as sacrifice. Traded for something better, something that could see between. They became instruments. Literal, living instruments. And when the being touched the ground, no explosion, no fanfare, the chorless played. Not music, not even noise. They played time. For exactly 47 seconds, every watch, phone, and atomic clock on Earth stopped. Just stopped. The world held its breath. Ocean stilled, air froze. And in that suspended silence, something else woke up. Something ancient. Buried. Not beneath the ground, but beneath consensus. Beneath what we agree to believe is real. When time resumed, the chorless were gone. The silhouette was gone. But deep in the Mariana Trench, an array of seismographs picked up a single tone. And it's growing louder. It's not just a song anymore. It's a countdown, and no one knows what happens at zero. There's a broadcast no one wants to admit happened. Not the FCC. Not the intelligence agencies. Not even the networks themselves. But it did. For 73 terrifying seconds, at 4:44 am on July 3, 1997, a test signal on Channel 9 in eastern Nebraska was interrupted. The screen went black, then came static, then her voice. Not a woman's voice. Not synthetic. But something attempting human speech, trying to shape syllables from frequencies not meant for the human ear. Viewers who witnessed the interruption, all 71 of them confirmed by subpoena, described it as being spoken to from inside their own teeth. One woman claimed it felt like someone was braiding her optic nerves. A Vietnam veteran gouged out his own eardrums. The message, it wasn't a warning, it wasn't a threat, it was a reminder. A series of coordinates, a date, a phrase spoken 3 times in descending pitch. Gubudui eri stiel here. The coordinates led to a now abandoned military observatory near Kangerlussuaq, Greenland. What they found inside was beyond comprehension. The entire facility was coated in a thin black dust, magnetically active, with a structure mimicking human bone marrow. Every clock on the site had melted, not from heat, but from contradiction. They had experienced 2 separate timelines simultaneously and fractured under the paradox. And then there was the chair. In the center of the observatory's collapsed atrium sat a throne, like construct of intertwined vertebrae, pulsing softly, rhythmically. Humming in the same exact tone detected in the Mariana Trench, the chair faced a wall covered in carvings. Not runes, not symbols, sheet music, but not for an instrument, not for a human voice. It was a score for the earth itself, a composition meant to be played through ley lines, tectonic vibrations, and the screams of the dying. That's what the Corliss were built for. That's what she was conducting? And the countdown? It wasn't to destruction, it was to performance. At 03:13 am on December 21st of this year, the concert begins. And when it does, there will be no encore. Because you can't encore silence, not when the first note is the last breath of a species. The chair wasn't built by man, not by alien, not by angel, nor demon. It was constructed by something older than language. Something that never needed names, only vibrations. They're called the Architects of Stillness. Entities so ancient they don't exist in time, but in harmonic alignment, dissonant frequencies stabilized only when the world is quiet enough to hear them. They've never written books. They've never appeared in dreams. They've never needed to, because they compose you. Your heartbeat, just percussion. Your thoughts, a dissonant melody struggling for form. Your soul, a single note vibrating in the black space between movements. And the chair, it's not a throne, it's a conductor's stand. They built it when the earth was still molten, carving ley lines into the crust like grooves on a record. Every extinction event, just a skip track. Every prophet, a misplaced note. Every war, every kiss, every scream, all of it sound check. Because the final movement is coming, and they've been rehearsing it for eons. Their fingerprints, found in the resonance of Gregorian chants, where monks sang syllables they didn't understand. In the tuning of Japanese shakuhachi flutes, cut to frequencies that lull tectonic plates to sleep. In Mozart's final symphony, which when slowed down by a factor of 666, reveals a waveform identical to infant brain waves. But here's the final horror. The performance won't be heard, it'll be felt. Every bone will vibrate until it liquefies. Every mountain will collapse inward like a clapping hand. Every ocean will hum itself into the sky. And those few, those terribly few, who remain to witness it, their minds will not survive the overture. But the chair will, it always does. It did in Atlantis. It did in It did in Jonestown. And it did beneath the Vatican's 8th sub-basement, where a room with no doors hums in a key that makes blood weep. This isn't a warning. This is acceptance. Because the architects don't need your permission. Only your resonance. And if you've heard this story, even once, even as fiction, you've already been tuned. So when the earth takes its final breath, you'll know why. And you'll understand what it means to be a note in someone else's song. There is no silence anymore, only the final chord.